возвращаемся после обеда. Для начала немножко вводной информации. Воркшоп 1 сейчас продолжится, также и воркшоп 2, где рассказывается про Burp, рассказывается, а в воркшопе 1 Александр Матросов и Евгений Родионов рассказывают про реверсинг объектно-ориентированного кода. Трек 2 также сейчас стартует. У нас на основной сцене попрошу поприветствовать Джереми Браун. Good luck.
Thanks. Hello, Moscow. Great to be here, actually. Don't know if the organizers showed you any story, but it was a little hard to get here. And I'm definitely glad that it worked out because what an awesome conference to present. What a great place. But today, I'm going to be talking to you about hacking virtual appliances. And, well, actually, right now I'm going to be talking to you about that. In 2 hours, I'm going to be talking to you about browser fuzzing, so come back for that. But right now, I'm talking to you about hacking virtual appliances. And this is an area that's really interesting to me. And I kind of got into it because I didn't see anyone doing security around these things. And when I first started looking at them, I found a lot of really interesting bugs, a lot of remote root bugs. So they became really valuable, so I decided to do more and more research. And again, I didn't see many people looking in this area, and some of these bugs are very specific to virtual appliances. And if you don't know what virtual appliances mean, that's fine. I'm going to go through all that and hopefully show you something new today. So, if next works, all right. Quick run through the agenda. Look at the introduction, just kind of talk about what virtual appliances are, where they are, why this stuff's important at all. Always good to know, motivation to do further research. Look at the image analysis and how I actually went about looking and finding these vulnerabilities in virtual appliances. And then look into the vulnerabilities themselves. There's a ton and a few different categories. I kind of grouped them together into miscellaneous at the end because there's so many different kinds of bugs that you can find in them. And some are very specific to the kind of virtual appliance area like password litter. That's pretty specific. There's some other areas it gets into too. And then go with the conclusion and where to go from here and how vendors can actually start making these much more secure than they are right now. So you know my name. I'm an independent researcher consultant at the moment. Used to work for Microsoft, worked on Windows, phone, Xbox security. Also worked in Malware Protection Center for a while. And before that, I worked at Tenable. And probably a few of you have used Nessus before. I wrote a few Nessus plugins while I was there. Did some reverse engineering, things like that. So fun times. So to be clear, what I'm not talking about, in this area, in the VA area, relatively non-critical issues. I'm not going to be talking about much denial of service, cross-site scripting. Again, these can be critical in other areas, but virtual appliances, it's not a huge deal. And also not decrypting the VM images because that's sometimes necessary as well in order to even start doing static analysis of the images. You need to have the keys and decrypt them. And there's not a lot of tools that will let you do that today. So all that's pre-bug hunting stuff. This talk is very focused on vulnerabilities. And so that's what we're going to be mostly talking about. Remote shells. If you're a fan of remote shells, command injection, backdoor accounts, and then once we get the shell, we're going to be looking at how to escalate privileges to, of course, root, because most of the systems we look at, just about all of them that I looked at are Linux-based systems, so keep that in mind as well. And other interesting bugs, there's a format string bug in here, some kind of misconfigured services that allow us to gain a little bit of ground. And again, one of my favorite bugs that's specific to this area is password litter, and I'll show you more about that. So what is a virtual appliance? You guys look pretty smart. You can figure it out. Physical appliance, virtual appliance. So physical box, and then you have a disk image that you insert into a hypervisor with all kinds of configuration and run in a data center or run at home, wherever you wish. Use VMware, all those different kinds of hypervisors. And again, the kind of thing the vendors are saying here, okay, we have a physical appliance, we can ship that to you, just give them basically a little tiny computer with a bunch of networking ports, or we can just take all of that, whatever's on that flash memory, whatever's on that hard drive, dump it onto a virtualized disk, an ISO or a VHD or something like that, and just ship it to the customer, ship it to their data center, wherever they want to install it. So one interesting article I found, and this is from a VMware article, that is another reason that a lot of vendors are doing virtual appliances is physical appliances no longer need to be shipped across national borders. I never really thought about that before. I never really thought that would be a reason, but it is interesting when you look at how how do you deliver the customer a device. You have to go through customs, you have to go through import and export and all that with a physical device. Not so much when you have a virtual device that you can either send them or drop somewhere, or they can download, things like that. So that's definitely something that's going to make virtual appliances take off even more than for physical appliances, once we get the computing power down. An important distinction here, the bugs that are on virtual appliances aren't specific to an environment. It's kind of like the one bug rules all thing, where this is not some specific configuration you got to have or make any modifications to the appliance for it to be vulnerable. Once the bug is shipped in this, there's not a ton of different versions that you need to diff and things like that. One bug is going to take care of all of them. So that's an important distinction to make between that and just regular user land programs or things you would install on Windows and Linux. Virtual appliances are a little bit different. So a lot of the popular vendors, pretty much all the major vendors have virtual appliances. Probably not so much Microsoft, for example, because they don't ship a lot of Windows virtual appliances. Maybe a couple. But most of the major companies, IBM, Symantec, VMware, Cisco has a ton of virtual appliances. VMware has a pretty good lot as well. I couldn't really look at SAP's virtual appliances because they have cloud-only trials, so I can't actually download it and do my analysis on it if you're only hosting it in a web page for me that I have to log in and do all this stuff. So thanks a lot for that. Could have got some free security work, but oh well. So some of the pros and cons for bug hunting. The biggest thing here, they share pretty much the same amount of code. I mean, everything from the physical device and the virtual, it's pretty much they just dump everything on a disk image and ship it to customers. So bugs you find there, of course, are going to be probably vulnerable on virtual and physical. And the common mindset that creates a lot of these bugs is customers don't have root. That's a huge thing where, okay, either they don't have root or they don't have a shell. So there's all these debug interfaces, all these just sensitive information, bash history, things like that. They're just left on the system, and then when you start looking at, when you start statically analyzing it, even if you don't have root dynamically when you install it and start running it, if you look at it statically, you can find all these things they left on there, and they can lead to some pretty serious vulnerabilities. So why go after these appliances at all? Now you know what they are. They're definitely, prevalence is one factor. As I said, they're becoming more and more popular. We'll look at entertainment. There's a few slides I have that are just funny things that happen they're not really bugs per se, but just really things that kind of go, I should take another look at this because there's probably some more serious things going on. And value, of course. Enterprises are using these systems, so the bugs here are valuable. You can, interesting from there. So here's one. It basically looks like somebody just said, oh, here's an image of my work PC. It's a virtual appliance. Change password if you want to, don't. And they just left the bash history on here. They left the vim history. They left the .ssh known host file. So you can kind of see where this is going, where they're just leaving things. They're saying, okay, maybe they don't have root, they don't have whatever privileges to even look at these files, so we don't need to worry about removing them. This is one where they left just plain text passwords in the configuration file. The default password is secure all. This one, this was a bug where they're like, okay, we can't leave plain text passwords in the configuration file, so let's hash them. The only thing here, they forgot to salt the hash. So any rainbow table is going to pick this up, no matter, even if it's a pretty complex password, they're still going to pick it up as cluster password. This one where they left the password, and any local user can just log into the database using the password that's on the local system, and do whatever they want from there. Again, not really a bug, just kind of warming up to show you the things and the kind of information that's left on these systems that you can further use to actually exploit vulnerabilities. And this one, this is probably from a IBM virtual appliance. because they're SFTPing into internal IBM systems, and downloading looks like a image file. And it's even funnier here, they try to remove the bash history, and this is the bash history, so they didn't really do a very good job at removing it, right? So entertainment factor, one more. This one, they sudo rooted the ID binary. Why would you ever sudo root the ID binary? Like, there had to be some bug where they're like, we need this thing, when it executes ID, we need to make sure it thinks it's root. So we're just going to leave it like that. Totally useless. You can't really use it for, if anyone knows how to exploit a sudo root ID binary, let me know. But it's just a strange thing that occurs. So, value. Again, a lot of these virtual appliances I'll be talking about are used in the enterprise. And the most important thing here, customers really want these bugs fixed, because if they're going to trust that a virtual appliance is just as secure as a physical appliance, and you start shipping all these things, you start giving people free trials and download them, find these vulnerabilities, and then don't even maybe pay attention to them, then that's really not good for customers. They definitely want these bugs fixed because they're putting money into it just as if it was a physical appliance. It's the same to them. So why is security so bad? Again, at this point, the vendors are just saying, hey, here's an image of a computer. It's a virtual appliance. We don't have all this QA that we normally have on the physical appliances. It's really easy. Just go set it up. Here's the default password. The default user has sudo privileges. All these things. So it's just not really, vendors aren't really taking that seriously at this point. I know it's a recurring theme in just about every new wave of vulnerabilities, but that's what's happening here as well. So this is the vendor's dog apparently sitting down, having a cup of coffee, enjoying the income. So you might be asking at this point, well, how do I get a virtual appliance to look at? Well, I'll tell you how. At least how I did it. So vendor websites are a good source of these. Of course, you can look for free trial, request evaluation, all these Google dorks. You got to watch out. Some of them are like a mixed trial demo stuff. You want to look out for that. You can make a purchase, so you can make an investment. Especially if you perhaps make a living selling bugs or things like that. You can make an investment, acquire the virtual appliance, and then find bugs and go from there. And then sometimes they're just not available. I ran into a couple cases where you needed a support contract. You needed to be a company. It needed to be a company-to-company purchase or have some existing support there before you could even acquire one, even if you were willing to pay for it. So you're in these strange situations like that when you start digging in. So you guys have to be fully aware of what virtual appliances are. So image analysis, how did I go about looking at them? So virtual appliances are distributed like a lot of different systems in this way digitally. They have OVA containers. They usually provide a disk image and like some kind of metadata files to tell you how to set up the configuration. They may just come as VHD, may just come as a hard drive you plug into the hypervisor. So a couple different ways I mentioned before, dynamic and static. So dynamic, boot up the system, basically what you see is what you get. You're not looking at it statically, you're playing with the system, you're trying to see if you have root, trying to see if you can get shell. It's the trouble here, again, is if you don't have those things, it may be motivation to find them, but at the same time, you need to use both techniques. You need to use a static approach combined with that. Because statically, you can look at the file system without ever having to boot it up. You can see, in the shadow file if they have undocumented users. You can check, you can have documentation, check the shadow file. If the user's not there, and then maybe you can crack the password, then there's a vulnerability. And the procedure here, you need to take the raw file system and convert it using like QEMU Suite, something like that, and then use some kind of like imager or forensic tool to browse it. I think the one I used was FTK Imager, something like that, and it was pretty good for browsing raw file systems. But the limitations here that bit me at least once or twice was some of them virtual appliances have first boot scripts. So as soon as you boot them, they start setting passwords. They start doing all these things where you kind of relied on that. Maybe it works at first, but as soon as you boot, things start changing. So you have to use both approaches to get a good picture and confirm the bugs in these. So now the meat the meat. I'm going on to the bugs. The vulnerabilities that I've discovered in these virtual appliances. Again, very broad categories, a lot of undocumented users, and then a lot of miscellaneous from there, and some password litter. So the first one, look at Cisco Paging Server. It's an OEM for single wire software. They provide paging, server stuff. If you've ever used a paging server, you probably haven't. It's fine. So on this one, there's actually 3 interfaces to authenticate: the SSH daemon, webadmin, and the web interface. So the first 2 of these, obviously if you know Linux pretty well, you know the webadmin and the local authentication system, which SSH usually uses, share the same. They're the same. They're your system passwords, all that. The web interface Cisco took on this approach is different. It uses a totally different way to store passwords, check authentication. So what happens when you change the admin password in the web interface? Absolutely nothing on the local system. So when you're documenting only to change the administrator password on the web interface, and you never talk about changing any of the other credentials, which are still default on the system, well, even if the password is, for example, change me, you're never going to change it. You're never going to change that password because the documentation only tells you to change the web interface. Unless you're some really skeptical administrator, you're not going to worry about the system at this point. You set up the paging server, the appliance is running fine, you don't have anything to worry about. So you could chalk it up as a documentation bug, sure, but really you can just take this and own a bunch of paging servers. Because no one is ever going to change a password that's technically undocumented. Changing the passwords with an undocumented authentication system even. So the next one, EMC Power Path. So here's a virtual appliance that I found a couple undocumented accounts on, EMC Update and Service User. So guess what I'm going to do with those? Dictionary attack. So load them up in John the Ripper. I found EMC's update's password. The other one took, I think I was cracking it for quite a while, probably a week or 2, and never did find anything, so it must be random, complex, whatever. But for this one, we just got a remote on the system to the web interface, just by an undocumented password. So now we can control things on this appliance by default with an undocumented user because of this mistake. Just leaving them on for, not restricting it to maybe local only, or forgetting to change the password when it first boots up. This is never documented, so therefore a remote on EMC for this one. So this one's in IBM Smart Cloud Monitoring Virtual Appliance. So I only tested the trial, so that's the only one I could have available. It looked as if you could upgrade it to the production, so just caveat there. I'm 90% sure this still works in the official version. But I only had the trial to test on this one, just FYI. So there's 6 users with bash shells on the system. 2 of them aren't documented, DAS user 1 and DB2 SDFE 1. So we find the password, and now we have a remote on IBM Smart Cloud Monitoring Virtual Appliance. Just by, again, undocumented accounts, there's no way to change the password through the documentation. Again, unless you're just a paranoid administrator that looks on your system all the time for these things, and you're not just one who sets it up, then you're never going to find this out. So VMware Horizon Mobile Manager. This platform is, of course, for managing mobile devices, and there's an MMP undocumented user on this one. So what do you think happens here? Boom. Found out the password is actually MMP, and now we get a remote on a VMware virtual appliance. It's kind of a recurring theme at this point. But, so there's a caveat with this one too. I actually sent this to VMware, but it was end of life. So I found this a few months ago. It was becoming end of life just recently, like maybe a week or 2 ago. And I should have updated the slides. I actually did. They did confirm this was vulnerable, but they weren't going to fix it because it was end of lifing the product. But if I'd have found this 2 years ago, it would have still been just as good. They would just end of life it today. So Cisco Mobility Services Engine, another interesting virtual appliance. There's 2 user accounts on that appliance, root and Oracle. So of course, root's password is set by the administrator when you install it. Oracle is untouched. So this is going to be interesting. So I tried cracking the password here with, for example, John the Ripper, and it was unsuccessful. But they have to set it somewhere. It has a password. It has a shadow entry on the system. So there must be a password somewhere, right? Took a long time, but I finally found the script that sets the password. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, so this is a really huge screen. Right there to the bottom left, XMPDBA123. So this is one where I actually could not crack the password after I had the shadow file because they set it complex enough to not allow for that to happen in a reasonable amount of time, but I still found them setting it later on. So still a remote on the Cisco MSE appliance. But I took this one a little bit further. So now we have Oracle, which has a shell for some reason, and can log in remotely. You know, you can stop that if you just turn it off in the configuration file. But they chose not to do that. So let's see if we can escalate our privileges a little bit more with this one. So if we look at the post-install log file, they make suid copies of Chmod and Chown. I know you guys know what those utilities do if you've used Linux for any amount of time. You don't want to set the suid root bit on those binaries. But they did. So let's use them to first change the permissions of the sudoers file. So this is one way to exploit it. There's a million different ways. This is the way I chose. I thought it was probably the easiest way to just go ahead and add ourselves to the sudoers file so we can just automatically upgrade to root. But we got to clean up after that. So we make this really, really stealth. So if you're actually hacking systems out there, this is going to help you clean up after yourselves, assuming they don't have some file system monitoring going on. Got to look out for that, but I'm sure you know how to do that. Anyways, we add ourselves to the sudoers file, and now we have root. So through one mistake of them having a complex password, which wasn't crackable, but finding it in an install file, and them also making a silly mistake, making suid root copies of Chown and Chmod, we were able to add ourselves to the sudoers file and escalate to root. So this one is Panoplia Onsite. So if you never heard of Panoplia, that's fine. They're supported by Cloudflare. That's pretty big. So lots of people, are probably going to use them if they're supported by Cloudflare. So they actually did a really good job here generating random credentials. So default passwords should not exist. That's just, after I go through a million of these virtual appliances, there's no reason to have default passwords. This is actually the right way to do it. The on-site key is essentially the password for this appliance. So they upon boot, generate a random set of credentials. Great security. Only one thing here they did wrong, which got them. They forgot to remove the bash history. And you see that line after sudo panoplia min, that long alphanumeric string. It looks like they made a typo when they were escalating privileges earlier. So let's take advantage of that. Now, this is not even the administrator account for the appliance. This is I guess you would say, the vendor's administrator account for the appliance. The administrator password I showed you earlier that they randomly generated is for the customer. This particular vendor, Panoplia, apparently has other accounts that are only accessible by the vendor. Another really interesting thing in the virtual appliance field, a lot of vendors are putting accounts on the system that the customers don't even have access to. So now we found out their master password for all these virtual appliances that they're shipping to customers, and the customers don't even know this password. So, you know what's cooler than a remote user? Guess what Panoplia Min also has? Sudo privileges. So now we have a remote root on every customer virtual appliance Panoplia has shipped. It's not good. Not good for them. Yeah, and again, my point of them keeping static passwords, that's another question that needs to be raised too. Should vendors be keeping static passwords that customers aren't even aware about? Ran into that a few times in my research. So Sev1, another one you may not have heard about. They are definitely used by a lot of people, a lot of interesting people. Verizon, Comcast, HBO. Bet they get a lot of free TV for this. But they had to do a silent patch recently. So when I was looking at the virtual appliance they ship, I found an undocumented account, CMCDR, with a password of CMCDR. Okay, so great. Now we have a remote. So I'm looking on the system, and there's a suid root binary, AS lookup. It looked like a custom binary, so I was just playing around with it, what I usually like to do with custom binaries that I like to do 10 or 15 years ago and actually worked much better. Give the command line arguments a bunch of characters. And guess what? The 90s attack worked again. So there's a buffer overflow in the first argument of AS lookup, suid binary. You get the point. So we have not only a remote, but a possibility to exploit that to get root privileges as well. But I did a search for CMCDR user, and there was actually some release notes where they had released a new version that contained information about patching. But the URL had been removed. Thankfully, Google caches everything for better or for worse. And we look at the cache and see that platform removed shell access for CMCDR user. Okay. AS looked up, corrected an issue. Yes, you did. So they put in the release notes, which are now removed, and the release notes were hosted on a website that wasn't even related, as far as I could see, to Sev1. Another strange thing. So the latest public download for this virtual appliance was 5.3.6, and apparently it was fixed in 5.3.8. So they fixed the bug, but I don't know. You have to be a customer, I guess. I assume you get an email if you pay for support that says, "Hey, we fixed some interesting things. You should upgrade." But everyone else downloading the public version is just screwed. So that's not great. So let's go into command injection. Maybe a subclass of getting remote root or remote shell at this point. This is EMC recover point. Pretty popular virtual appliance from EMC. It provides continuous data protection. So they will protect your data if you use this appliance. That's what it says, right? So the default and also unchangeable. These are not just default. There is no way that I found, there may be some crazy way to do it, but there is no way that I found to change these credentials. They are locked into this virtual appliance. Box management, box management. So now we can SSH into the management interface, and we get this cute little console interface that tries to restrict us from doing anything but what they want us to do. Well, if we look at the diagnostic section of this, we find one that says run internal command, and that looked pretty interesting. But there's only a certain set of internal commands that we can run. If there was only a way we could run other commands than that. You guys forgot. This is command injection, right? Boom. Command injection. So if you just use SSH, which is a valid command, and give it some shell meta characters and fix up your STD out, you can break into a shell. So now that we have a shell with a box management user on recover point, let's see what else is interesting. So the bin run box management is the console interface. It just calls a Java for the UI, which is in com, cache, recover point, installation, jar. There's a class in that jar file that looks pretty interesting, and run internal command. We want to decompile that and see what else we may be able to do. Because we have access to this interface, see what else we can do with the appliance. So we look at the decompiled code here. We can see we can run ARP ping, date, EastTool, some Perl script, and it just puts the output in. Well, it takes the output, it prints it to internal command in the temp directory. And it puts, if any of the commands are on the list, it puts sudo in front of it. So from that, we can know that any of these commands are going to be executed with root privileges. So if we can execute any of these commands with root privileges, what can we do with that? So there happen to be, and again, we confirm our options in the sudoers file, and we see that we can execute all these. But I found that ARP will actually read a file. I didn't even know that before I tried this. So if we have sudo privileges to this, we don't need to use the console anymore. Once we break into shell, we just pass whatever file we want to read to sudo, and it will output any file reading it as system on the appliance. So definitely, I looked at the Perl scripts, and I couldn't really find any interesting bugs there, although it did some bad stuff. So the closest I got on this one, I didn't actually escalate to root, I guess, but I can read any file on the system as root. So there's a starting point. So there was a little bit of confusion about this one. So what is the root admin password? There is one in the shadow file, but it's not given to customers. And if you ask for it, there's just, for example, somebody asked for it here. How do you reset the admin password for GoverPoint? And the fix, they say, is the solution requires assistance from EMC. Contact EMC support service. And it's just, again, the theme of the vendor having credentials that the customer doesn't even know about. I don't know how customers feel about that. I don't know if they know about it yet. But definitely a point for discussion. So the next one, SolarWinds Log and Event Manager. I wanted to highlight this one. It's like $4,500. And it's actually a SEIM or SIEM, and it makes it easy to use logs for security, compliance, all that stuff. So as default creds for CMC password, and runs a SSH server on 32022. I think this one's actually undocumented CMC user as well. So once we log in as CMC user, we have another command injection. We use literally the same string we use to exploit the EMC bug for this one. We drop into a shell. So manager config is the main interface for this one, and it's actually written in Perl. So Contigo control calls a bunch of shell scripts to implement commands. Contigo control is of course writable by Contigo user that we were just logged in as, and it's allowed to call any of those scripts as root. That's not the best idea. So if we add something useful to Contigo control, like, I don't know, give us a shell for free, no password. If we just do that, then we can just upgrade for free. So that is a very, very straightforward command injection that we use to first break out of the shell and then go to and add ourselves via a local vulnerability to escalate to root. And there's one more bug in this appliance as well, a format string bug. I don't know if we have any old timers out there for these bugs, but they were super interesting. They're still around a little bit. I found them from time to time. But again, the interface is in Perl. So if you give it %p, %n, whatever it accepts, and then there's a format string bug there. But there's actually some exploitable format string bugs in Perl. So there's a really interesting paper back in 2005. If you want to look at that, there's actually maybe an exploit out for that as well. But sorry, I'm a pretty big fan of format string vulnerabilities, and I keep hearing they're dead, but I keep finding them. So that was fun. So another thing, this was about the root password, people asking about it. They're like, yeah, you can call support and we can use the root account to get in and reset the password for you. I'm like, I don't want you to do that if I ever buy this appliance. A lot of confusion around that issue. So time for some crazy SUID binaries. I know we exploited a bunch of bugs of those before. Let's talk about one in Cisco Prime infrastructure. So if you have a Linux box at home, you know that if you take a log of all the SUID files, there should be nowhere near 67. That's way too much, right? There's usually 20, 25, 67. You know there's going to be some problems here. So if you just grep the file for shell, the word shell, we have some interesting ones. One, run shell command. One, run shell as root. What do you guys think they do? Probably going to be helpful to us, right? So they're so poorly written, actually, run shell command. If you don't give it an argument, it crashes on a null point deref. So they didn't even check if an argument is given. So you know the quality of the code, there's going to be some more bugs here. I just could not believe they didn't check for an argument. It's like, did you write this in 30 seconds or what? So I'm not saying it was aliens, this certainly could have been. So the way it works here, run shell is root. You put whatever commands you want in a file. You pass that file to it. It runs them as root. Ouch. What about run shell command? Well, even easier. You just pass the command to it, and it runs it as root for you. So these are local binaries that are SUID, that are executable by anyone on the system. And trivial to get, privilege escalation from here. But I got to give them credit. They really stepped up security. They SUID rooted the user add binary, and they made it only executable to root. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Why would you SUID root it and only let root execute it? Why don't you just leave it alone? But I guess we can't use that to do anything, right? Oh, I forgot we have run shell command. So we can just add a root2 user with everything we need, old school style as you like it, and boom, we have root. Now we have crazy SUID binaries plus a remote going on. So we have, I know there's a lot of Cisco virtual appliances. That was Cisco Prime infrastructure. This is Cisco Prime Collaboration Assurance. There's many, many more. I'll try not to confuse you as much as possible. So there's two accounts on the system. Quickly, there's a corner case with the setup. It's not widely exploitable, but it's a noteworthy case study. So we'll go through it quickly. The interesting part here I want to get to is with the Java debug server, if you guys have ever used it. But there's an interesting SUID binary here, firewall. Guess what it does? Controls the firewall. So they're running Java debug server as a renamed process called em, sam, perf, mon, engine. And it's listening on the network interface, but the firewall's turned on. And they did a really good security thing by making sure that no one can access it from the firewall. Although they can just as easily made it listen on the local host and not even have to worry about that. I digress. So that's Java debug server. And IOActive did some really cool research on this. They did a hacking Java debug wire protocol. Basically any, as the TLDR says, turn any open Java debug server into reliable remote code execution. So let's see how that works. But one thing, we have to access it. We can do it locally, but we want it remote at this point. So we can just turn the firewall off. Because it's SUID, and we have privileges to do that, so just turn it off. So now we can access this remotely. So this is the exploit that IOActive wrote. I just used it, and I just told it. And I actually, to make it easier, I put netcat on the system. Whatever, you can, just to make it easy as possible to exploit. And now we have a remote root on the system through Java debug server. So anytime you see Java debug server running, especially remotely, so if it's local, you can get a local root. If it's running remotely, anytime you see Java debug server, it's literally, I think, a design flaw in the server. This exploit still works today, and I think it's a year or two old. I don't think there's any patch. They literally have to redesign it or just don't run it. So very important if you're doing a pen test for that. You only live once. So I know you guys are probably tired of hearing about remote roots, right? Those are so many of them. So I'm going to conclude with a few things. All you people out there wanting some defensive stuff, don't run away yet because I'm talking about that. But first, vendor communication. So scared, many offend the very policy. This is actually Facebook's first responsible disclosure policy. And they, FYI, they say they won't sue you if you make a good effort and work with them. Ouch. I think they've changed by now, but this was a few years ago. So brief disclosure timelines. The SolarWinds bug, they took a while to send me their PGP key, and I don't know if they had to generate it or if they just forgot where it was. I don't know what happened. But they fixed it in a few months, but it was just, the first response was like, we'll get you the PGP key soon. I'm like, isn't it just an email? Like, you just send me to me through email? And the EMC fixed it almost over a month, which was really nice. And then the guy I was working with at EMC left, and now I'll probably never get a bug fixed again, so that's great. Panopia noted they patched a potential security vulnerability. Sure. Cisco with the prime infrastructure released a private advisory. You have to log in to see it. It's not searchable. Not the best way to do it. VMware, as I said, send the Volt. So I initially disclosed this back in September, and they contacted me a couple days before I disclosed it and said, hey, can you tell us anything? I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, if you're going to contact me about it, sure. So I gave them the full details, and they decided not to fix. It's reasonable because they end the life of the product. SolarWinds, they fixed it September. Cisco fixed it a couple weeks ago. And EMC, the VRPA, they released the advisory in July. If you didn't see it up there, it's maybe not fixed. So playing defense, clean it up before you ship it. I mean, you guys saw the bash history where you're able to get a remote root just by a typo. Don't ship bash history to customers. That's nonsense. All the crazy SUID binaries on boxes, don't assume that nobody can get a shell, that nobody can do anything on a local system. So don't put, give me root binaries on the box. And then passwords unknown to customers. That just blows my mind. I don't know if that's the new way of thinking or not. That's just strange. Firewalling is definitely a great practice here, but don't let me turn off the firewall, of course. And like I said before, generating random passwords on boot, there should never be another default password. Like literally, it's unnecessary. You're just asking for trouble using default passwords. For virtual appliances, set a random password on boot and be done with it. You never have to ask them to do anything because they have the password on the local system. If they're looking at the local system, you're probably already screwed. So one interesting thing I saw that this is from Cisco Prime Collaboration Deployment, different from the other ones, I promise. They actually blacklisted users for remote access. This was an interesting mitigation because I thought at first I had a remote on this virtual appliance. I thought I saw Informix, done, undocumented, have a remote. And I tried to log in remotely. I'm like, why can't I log in remotely? Why can't I log in anywhere but the local system? Because they mitigated this problem. Somebody probably saw that and thinks, well, this guy doesn't need to log in remotely, so let's just put him on the deny list on the SSH server. Very good mitigation. It's practically useless now, even if there is a default password, because I can't log in remotely. For vendors here, this is very vendor specific, but don't mix trials and demos, and it's just super confusing. And not only to try to ruin some of my bugs, which didn't really affect me much, but just for the development team in general, they're going to be like, oh, this is a demo, so we don't need to put any security. And then the guy shipping is like, oh, no, we're ready to ship. It's actually a trial. And then that leads to a lot of bad assumptions. Don't ship the master development VM. You guys saw earlier shipping bash history, shipping all these other files. I mean, there should be a development VM and then a clean copy that you build from that. And I know I've heard from vendors, oh, we do all that stuff. It's like, okay, why do you have these bugs then? Why do they exist? You're obviously not doing it, or not doing it for all the appliances. And a checklist of must-not-haves. This was something that every development team should have when they're shipping a product for these appliances. I listed a bunch of things, and I'll list a bunch more. These are things, again, for developers. Don't do this when you ship the device. Or is for bug hunters to look for when they're testing virtual appliances. Whatever side you're on, you can use this. So default passwords, of course, undocumented one. If they're undocumented, document them. If they don't need to be on the system, remove them. Simple. Files, obviously unencrypted passwords or unsalted passwords, I should say, on this. Any sensitive data, all the SUID world writable scripts, was it EMC a minute ago? A world writable script, able to get root from that. Some of the services, if they're meant to be local, make them listen on the local interface. Don't listen on the network interface. Again, very unnecessary. And then using different authentication systems, that was kind of a subtle one-off example, but I could see that happening again in the future, actually. That was a pretty interesting bug. And assumptions, again, it all comes down to assumptions in this space. Don't assume it's not for production if you're shipping this. Don't say I can just hide this private key in a file like Cisco did a while back and got all their virtual appliances compromised. Don't only assume administrators can execute this script because somebody's going to come later on and say, here's a new feature. We're going to change the way this works. Maybe you're not even at the company anymore. I'm looking at this as a very, as a software company view, where a lot of things I've seen, people leave, they come back, and then bugs happen because of assumptions being made. And then again, with code churn and updates, a lot of things can change, so don't make any assumptions. Don't assume shit. And then esoteric thoughts here. There's a lot of helper. If you're going to go look at these appliances, I haven't broke them all. I don't have access to all of them. Not saying that I could if I would, but again, if you want to go look at these, think about helper services, all the helpers, all the things that maybe the external facing server is talking to an internal service. A lot of those go unchecked. Support services, remote access are always juicy, fertile ground for bugs. They have a lot of backup and restore directories, so you can look in those for the installation files to maybe see how they're doing something, how they're setting a password. And then really read the documentation, because it can be the difference between a bug and technically a feature. Forensics, oh my God. If I had $1 million, I wouldn't buy a forensics suite. But if I had $2 million or $3 million, if I just had a lot of extra money, I would buy a forensics suite and just own a ton of these virtual appliances, because we deleted all the sensitive files. Yeah, that's how forensics works, right? You can undelete things, and that would be a pretty good game changer, I think. So like I mentioned before, Cisco got bit by this huge bug. They shipped some private keys on a bunch of their virtual appliances. So anyone who had access to it could just get that key and get remote root on all their stuff. Pretty big deal. So in conclusion, as always, the area is still unexplored. There's a lot of stuff I didn't have access to. A lot of stuff that's really expensive. A lot of stuff they don't offer, to non-company entities or whatever at the moment. And they're only going to become more prevalent. Like I said, things are moving in a way where physical appliances, once we have, the data centers are getting more and more advanced, more and more processing power, disk space, all that. They're going to be able, even if you have a really high-performing device, we're going to be able to make it into bits and just push it into hypervisor in the cloud somewhere or something like that. And there's a lot more work to do. Like I said, getting access to these and then getting the vendors that properly fix some bugs is always an issue as well. So, interesting area to get into. And let me know if you have any questions. You got 5 minutes or so. This guy, I was told, will throw a box at you. And it won't hurt. That was close.
It's okay. Could you please go back to the slide before must not haves?
Must not haves, yes. Before must not haves.
Yeah,
there you
solutions. It's like not a question, it's kind of suggestion. Could you probably print it out and send out to every development team of every product in this world? Because it's not about virtual appliances, it's about basic security for every software production, no matter if it's virtual appliances or whatever else.
I'm glad I made a slide that will stand the test of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I will try to get that to. If you give me a list of companies, I'll email it to them. I really will. I really will.
Okay.
But thank you, though. Appreciate it. Any other questions? I can go back and forth probably on slides. I got like 3. There we go. Sorry.
Have you used any special software to scan about, for example, the files with incorrect permissions? Or because we have like Unix prefix checker, we have also Windows prefix checker and so other things.
Yeah. So if I understand it correctly, have I written any tools to automate a lot of these? The must not haves, looking for either bad permissions or things like that. I haven't come up with a tool set for it. I've literally came up with these slides recently for the must not haves. I actually thought a couple times about writing some tools for it, but I don't know. I got to a point where I was kind of, I had certain projects. I was kind of done with this one, and I didn't want to spend a lot more time writing tools for it. So I just wanted to kind of come up with a list. But not hard to do. Definitely not hard to do. If you have an automated framework, one vendor was telling me that they were going to take like the must not have stuff and kind of put it into their own tool set that they have checks for. So maybe in a way, I kind of assume that there is some framework that maybe a lot of software vendors already have to do certain checks and take those rules and kind of put them in there like that. But no, I don't have any tool set to do that, but it's totally possible to do that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any more questions? Any more? A couple good questions. One's more of a compliment, but I still appreciate it. Hope it was a compliment. No more questions? Everybody understood everything really well. I hope. I wrote it. When I was writing the slides, I was like, I have to make this simple enough for everyone to understand, but also stay awake. And most of you still seem awake, so that's good. Thank you. All right, if there's no more questions, come back and see me at 6 o'clock in the other track, but also stay for this guy. And thank you very much.